We're going to move along to the presentation on basic rights, or IEP. It's sort of combined. You have two handouts this evening. The first one is entitled IEP Basics for SpedPac, and the other one is really just a list of preparing yourself for your IEP meeting. So since this is SpedPac and we all are parents of children with special needs, I just want to know, is there anyone here who does not currently have an IEP in place, so that this is a brand new process for them? Okay, so like myself, does everyone have an IEP? Okay. So with regard to the IEP process, that's sort of the special education process that we all go through to develop the individualized education plan for our child. Now, how we get to that process and what that process involves is important to understand, because it will help you to know what your rights are and how to advocate effectively for your child. So the process really involves the IDEA, which is the federal law, and Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 71, Chapter 71B. That's our special education law, and then there's regulations that go along with that. I would not suggest that anybody go and look up the laws and try to read them in their entirety. It's just not going to be helpful information on what it is that you need to know when you go to a meeting for your child. So I'm going to try to pare that down into the information that is helpful, as well as my own experiences as a parent. I can tell you all that I was an attorney before I had my daughter, and I shifted into special education because of my daughter. But when I first started out in the process, I thought that, I would be better equipped to handle the situation, since I already was a lawyer and I read the law, and then I proceeded to enter the process. I can tell you that what the law says and the process that we engage in are very different things. So you need to understand the practical implications of what it is that you need to know about the law in order for you to obtain the supports and services that your child needs based on their individual needs. So we have the federal law and we have the state law. The federal law is considered that the floor. You can never go below what the federal law requires. The state law can add more benefits and more rights, but it can never provide anything less than the federal law. Massachusetts actually has better laws in the area of special education than a lot of states throughout the country. We have specific statutes relating to children who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and if your child has that disability, there's specific areas that the team has to address during the team meeting, having to do with issues that your child's impacted by because of their disability, like sensory needs, like behavior, like their communication needs, like their social skills. So it's really good that we have specific laws that target that, but in general, we have better special education laws than other states. So I'm going to try to highlight some of those things for you so that they'll help you navigate the special education world and the IEP process as it comes to your child. So when you have a concern about your child, and even if you don't know what their disability is, and maybe it hasn't been diagnosed, but you know that they're not doing things on the same level as their peers, you can request that your child be evaluated. You request that in writing by the district, and I say request it in writing simply because you want a record of when you requested that. There's certain timelines that they have to adhere to when it comes to evaluation. So when you request it, within 5 days, they're supposed to send you a consent form to do the evaluations. Once you sign and return the consent form, once they have it, they have 30 school days to complete those evaluations. In addition to the 30 school days, you add on 15 more school days for a total of 45 from the time you sign the consent form to when you're supposed to have an IEP meeting to talk about those evaluations. Sorry, I have to drink some water because I talk so much. So with regard to the evaluations, they're supposed to be in all areas of suspected disability. Now for children, depending on who they are, that's going to vary. Some children are going to need academic testing. They all need academic testing because they're in the school system. And special education has to do with, accessing the general curriculum. So you want to see where your child is academically. But your child can also have communication issues. Are they nonverbal? Do they have issues with articulation? Do they have issues with word retrieval when they're talking? You want to have a speech and language evaluation. Do they have issues with their physical mobility that you would want a physical therapy evaluation? Do they have issues with fine motor activities in terms of writing, buttoning their clothing, zippering, even visual spatial, which is sort of reading from left to right and being able to track things appropriately with your eyes? All of those things fall within the realm of occupational therapy. You know, whatever it is that's impacting your child's development that they're not doing in line with their grade and age level peers, that's something that you want to have evaluated. So once your child's evaluated, and I tell people when you sign your consent form for whatever the evaluations are, put right on the bottom of that form, I request copy of my child's evaluations at least 2 days in advance of the team meeting. Under Massachusetts regulations, you're entitled to copies of all evaluations at least 2 days in advance of the team meeting because it gives you the opportunity to read those. The issue is that if you don't ask for them in advance of the meeting and you don't do it in writing, you don't have a record, but you're not going to get them until you arrive at the team meeting and you're handed lots of information that you're then trying to read, digest, and respond to at the same time. So I always recommend that parents ask for that information first so that they can go over it, and then you can highlight the things you disagree with, are the things that you don't understand and you want to ask questions about. You want to take that opportunity to go over those evaluations before you go into your team meeting so that you're prepared. If you ask for them and you don't get them in advance of your team meeting, then you should reschedule your team meeting. Your team meeting has to be held at a mutually convenient date and time. So that means that both sides need to be reasonable. I'm not saying that you're going to dictate a specific, time that's, not within the school day, but it's obviously not what the district dictates either. People work, we have responsibilities for our families and for our professional lives, and that needs to be respected as well. So try to find a mutually convenient date and time, and if they give you a date and time that doesn't work, then just tell them that you need to reschedule the meeting. So evaluations are important because it's going to be the basis of eligibility and also what the supports and services are going to be. The evaluations are going to tell us whether or not there's something going on that needs to be either remediated or addressed through specific services. And evaluations are something that the team looks at, not just for your initial evaluation, but every 3 years your child is reevaluated by the district. So it's something that we go through initially and then we go through every 3 years. And the reason that is because first of all, we don't want children to be continuing on IEPs if they no longer need them, but also because children change and their needs don't stay the same from year to year. Hopefully they've been making progress with the supports and services that they've been receiving, and they, things need to be changed. Goals and benchmarks certainly need to be updated, and evaluations help us to do that. But also with regard to sort of looking at the child, is there a new area that needs to be addressed that wasn't identified previously? You should know if that happens, you don't have to wait for 3 years before you ask for an additional evaluation. If your child starts to develop something that, or, show something that didn't exist before, something that's sort of an obvious example would be they're all of a sudden having behavioral difficulties. They used to have a calm demeanor and now they're becoming frustrated and they're having temper tantrums. You ask for a functional behavior assessment. We want to look at the behavior and what is the purpose of that behavior? All behavior is communicating something. Is the behavior communicating the fact that the child can't communicate effectively, so they're frustrated by the fact that nobody can understand what it is that they want or what they need? So they're all related. So you get your evaluations after they're completed by the district, and then that's when you start the IEP process. Your rights with regard to the IEP process is that you want to have everybody there in the district that's required to interpret the evaluations that were actually done. If you had a psychological evaluation done, you want to have a school psychologist, PT, same thing. Because evaluation results are not written in common language that we read every day. There's test results, there's test scores, and you want to be able to ask questions and get answers to all of your questions. So whoever did a report, you want them there at the meeting. Then with regard to sort of going over the evaluations, you want to make sure that if you do not have English as your primary language, All of the evaluations are supposed to be in your native language so that you can understand that information. But also if your child, English is a second language to your child should be tested in their native language. What we want to do is look at the child and where the areas of need are, but we don't want to be misdiagnosing a child as having a disability simply because they didn't understand the test because they don't speak English as their primary language. So those are sort of all important things. When it comes to the disability, the IEP Basic gives you definitions of, or examples of types of disabilities. For children, 3 to 9 years old, a lot of times developmental delay is used, and that means it's a sort of a catch-all. I have a child who's now 13, and she actually has an intellectual impairment, a neurological impairment, a sensory impairment, a communication impairment, a physical impairment. So, it can be all of those things, and a lot of times developmental delay is a way of capturing that when they're young without targeting one specific area. Now that she's past 9 years old, she's given the definition of an intellectual impairment, and then the additional ways that her disability impacts her is described in her IEP. But the reason they use developmental delay is because a lot of children with the appropriate supports and services will no longer need services, and it's a way of not identifying them as having a lifelong disability when we don't know whether or not that's going to be the case yet. So these are specific types of disabilities that are listed. It's certainly not all. Disabilities are actually being identified on an ongoing basis, but that'll give you a general idea. So the evaluations are given, and you have to have two determinations with the evaluations. First of all, is there a disability? Okay, so the disability is either identified as a specific name or it can be under developmental delay, depending what it is. With regard to whether or not you're eligible for special education services, you not only have to have a disability, but you also, because of that disability, have to require special education services or one or more related services. And the related services are PT, OT, speech, ABA, music therapy, all of the ancillary services, as they call them. Yes, ma'am. ABA is applied behavioral analysis. It's a specific type of intervention that's used primarily for children on the autism spectrum. It's basically behavioral-based services, which is trying to reshape and redirect behavior or to change behavior in some way. But it's actually, it's effective for many children. It's not just limited to children on the autism spectrum. There's also a form of ABA that's called Discrete trial teaching, which is one-to-one tabletop teaching so that the child has that direct intervention one-on-one with the teacher, and that's usually for children that are much more severely impacted. But ABA is basically, it's a behaviorally based approach. But I would explain it to you as simply as this, is that we do things for a reason that we might not otherwise do. Like we go to work, but if we weren't getting a paycheck at the end of the week, we wouldn't go to work. So you bring it back down to sort of a more simplistic form for a child. My child likes musical toys, and she always has. But we never actually realized that we could have her do a task that she wouldn't ordinarily do, and whether it would be a reading task or a math task. And then as her reward, she gets her toy. So it's basically, it's a behavior modification to sort of the way that they would otherwise function. It's using behavior to shape the way we do things for better outcomes. And some of that has to do with behavioral services to change interfering behaviors, which can be as simple as not paying attention and not looking at your materials, or it can be a full-blown meltdown on the floor where the child is kicking and screaming, because obviously if that's the circumstance, that child is not accessible to learning during that time. So redirecting and changing that behavior needs to be the primary focus, because until that behavior is brought under control, the child's ability to learn and acquire skills in other areas is adversely impacted.
Is there an evaluation for that?
Yes, you can ask for an ABA evaluation. With regard to questions, if people have specific questions about the presentation tonight, feel free to either jot them down or you can email them to us on the SpedPac email list. and we'll send them out. And the other thing I was going to say is about the presentations that came up, the opportunities that, you know, someone said, how do you find out about some opportunities? If people know of opportunities or want to find out about opportunities, our email list provides an opportunity for sharing of information. It's not just we send out information and you receive it. We're also welcoming of information that other people may know of that we should be sharing with other parents, okay? So just going through the IEP process itself, we start out with, after we do the evaluations and the child is found to have a disability, and then because of the disability they require special education services, either in reading, writing, math, you know, all the subject areas, or they require the ancillary services. Then we're going to move on to the development of the actual IEP. The district is required to have somebody at the IEP meeting that's authorized on behalf of the district to make decisions. Generally in Boston, that person's known as the Special Education Coordinator, formerly known as the ETS. That person is there on behalf of the district to facilitate the meeting and to ensure that the decisions that the team makes gets captured and reflected in the IEP, but also that the services that the team recommends are being provided by the district, or if there needs to be follow-up information, if the team's recommending something that nobody at the team actually provides, then the SPED coordinator needs to be the person to reach out to the district to make sure that those services are available to the child. As an example of that, I would say if the team recommended that the child needed a rules-based reading program, like the Wilson Reading Program or Orton Gillingham, because the child has a specific learning disability, and the team recognizes that that's something that would be beneficial to the child, but nobody on the team is actually a certified instructor of those reading programs, then the SPED coordinator would contact the Office of Special Education Services, let them know that that service had been recommended by the team, and they needed to find somebody that could provide those services within the district. They certainly have those people in the district already, but they might need to send somebody from one location to another to provide the service to the child. And the service moves, not the child, so the service comes to you. With regard to sort of ABA services that are provided at the school, the ABA therapists go to the school and provide services to the children. The children aren't taken to a different location to receive those services. It's really so the child can go in and out of their class throughout their day based on whatever their individual needs are, or the child is receiving the services directly in class, and that's a better integration of their program as a whole. So we move services, we don't move children. So in going through the IEP process, I sort of broke it down for the sections as they will come up during the course of an IEP meeting. So you can use these handouts as templates for when you're going into your IEP meeting to know what to expect next, the order that you should be going in, because the order is the way that the IEP is actually written. So after we do the evaluations and we talk about what the results of those evaluations are, now we're going to let the parents speak about what their individual concerns are. I always recommend to parents that you write them down in advance of the meeting because it's a very emotional and difficult process for parents. Generally, we go in and there's 6 to 10 people on the district side, and then there's you. Hopefully you can bring someone else with you that's a good note taker so that while you're busy listening to everything, someone else can be taking notes for you. But I say write your parent concerns down before you go in, because then they'll say parent concerns and you don't have to say, you can say, here they are right here, I typed them out, just please include them in my IEP. You can read them first to sort of focus the team specifically on what your concerns are, but don't try to do it on the spot. It's just a difficult situation that I've seen too many parents struggle with, and then you're trying to get it in after the fact, and then the IEP's issued and it didn't have it in there correctly. So it's really good to do that in advance of the meeting so that you can just read it and turn it in and be done with that section of the IEP. Then we're going to move on to the student strengths, and this is also where they include the evaluation, some of the evaluation results. In developing an IEP for your child, it's going to be the document that the service providers receive when your child either enters the school or their individual classroom. Now, obviously we want them to know about what your child's challenges are and what their difficulties are, but we also want them to know what your child's strengths are, or what your child likes, or what are the sort of positive things that your child likes to do. Helpful information about, like, if your child likes to Some children like to read books on their own, or they have favorite books. You want to call attention to what it is so that you're giving people a picture of the whole child. You don't just want them to have a picture of a child with a disability. You want them to know there's other aspects of your child that you want them to be aware of, so they can appreciate not only what their needs are and respond to those needs, but so they can also value their strengths and support those strengths while they're in their programs. So that's that section of the IEP. The vision statement is next, and that's really a team vision statement. For younger kids, when they're 3 years old, you don't want to be making a vision statement about what they want to do when they're an adult. I mean, that would just be unrealistic. You might want to talk about what it is that you expect to achieve over the next year. So the team would develop that, but it's sort of where do we expect to go next? If your child's reading at a second grade level and they're in the 4th grade, you'd say that you want to work on closing, we see Mary, I use my daughter's name all the time, we see Mary closing the gap in the area of reading by more than 1 grade level over the next year as a result of the reading intervention services that she's going to get this year, in order for her to be able to read text independently and to write, a cohesive paragraph based on what that text was about. So it's really where do we want to go, and it should be related to what the child's individual needs are. Now, PLEP A is the first page that's related to the academic subjects, okay? So it's math, reading, writing, social studies, and science. And this is the area about where we're going to talk how your child's disability impacts them when it comes to accessing the general education curriculum, and what accommodations they need as a result of the disability for those particular areas, what methodologies or specifically designed instruction they need to receive there, and then how we're going to actually measure progress. So on the handout, I gave specific examples of types of accommodations. There is no finite list of accommodations. It is based on who your child is and what their individual needs are, whether a child needs a specialized chair, whether they need, whether they need to sit on a therapy ball while they're in class because they can't sit still, and that's something that helps them stay regulated. Whatever it is, and some of that information should be specifically pulled from your evaluations. Evaluations are also supposed to include recommendations on how to meet the child's needs because of the disability or because of the areas of delay. So you talk about you want to list out the accommodations, and all of this you can do in advance, and following along sort of the outline I gave you here. You can go through these sections and decide what it is that you think should be in those sections, so that when you go to the IEP meeting, you're able to provide your list then. It's, you can get recommendations from others and you can add on to that, but the team has to decide what the appropriate accommodations are. One of the things that I point parents to nowadays is assistive technology. It can be very helpful for children with disabilities. My daughter absolutely loves the iPad. I mean, the things that she can do with the iPad are amazing to me considering her level of need, and that technology has given her access to things that she's never had access to before. So look at the issue of assistive technology, and if it's an area that hasn't been looked at by the team, then ask for an assistive technology evaluation. That's another type of evaluation that can be done. So I give examples of those, and then with regard to the content, what you want to know is, can your child access grade level content at the same volume and pace as their peers? Or do they need modified? Now, it can be the same content information in terms of the same subject matter, so that your child is going along with the class with regard to whether they're, if they're studying the Pilgrims or whatever it is, that they would get the same information, but they would get it at a level that they're able to access depending on their individual needs. Does it need to be a shorter length, type of subject matter? Does the language need to be reduced to a lower grade level so that your child can understand it? How does the content need to be changed from the way that the other kids are doing it? If your child's doing a math problems, but math is an area that they have a disability in, you might want to say that we're going to limit the number of problems on the page, because it's not the quantity that we're interested in, it's the quality. If your child has an issue with homework, and if homework is something that they struggle with because they don't have the direct support to do it from a specialized educator, then you want to ask for an accommodation of a reduced workload with regard to homework. All of these are possible accommodations and changes to things that other children that do not have a disability don't get, and it's what your child needs in order for your child to be successful and to move forward acquiring the skills that they need, whatever their area is that the delay is in. With regard to the methodology, I gave examples there too. You know, children learn in the general education classroom, generally in classes from anywhere from 20 to 25 and maybe even more than that at the higher levels. So small group instruction is a methodology. Yes, ma'am?
Yes, I just want to know what is the process for a child that's approaching their 18th birthday, and as far as at this point not quite make up their own decisions or ideals and
The law allows for your child to delegate that decision-making authority to you, and you're supposed to sign a form in front of the team that you will continue to make those decisions. But I have to tell you, legally, once your child turns 18, you need to take additional action to make, you want to get a guardianship that you want to get through the probate court, that you can fill out, and that you would need to have your child evaluated by their doctor, and maybe get input from a licensed psychologist, depending on the level of guardianship that you want. But for our children, you know, it's a dangerous time if they don't have the level of functioning that other kids do in terms of making decisions regarding, you know, financial decisions and even decisions with, you know, that they're going to get, decisions they're going to have with paperwork coming in because they're 18 years of age, but particularly with regard to the IEP meeting. You can do a delegation of authority that's less formal. Boston has the form for that. You just want to make it out at the IEP meeting because there needs to be a witness. But with regard to guardianship, that's something you want to look into. And then you also want to look at your child's eligibility for SSI if they don't already have it. Because now that they're adult, they would be entitled to their own income from the government if they have a disability. So as things, you know, as the kids get older, we don't just talk about transition, but then they go into adulthood. But children with special needs can be eligible for special education services up to the age of 22. And then you transition into the adult world, and that's a scary place because unlike special education services, adult services are a benefit, they're not a right. So you really get in line with everybody else, and then services are only available based on what the state is funding at that time.
Okay, well, for the first thing, so you say that before the child turns 18, this is the time now to do it?
Yes.
Transition's a little more.
Yes.
Okay, and the second thing is, I did apply for SSI,
Okay.
and I was refused, was denied.
Okay.
So,
I mean, I don't know about your eligibility, you know, personally, but, you know, that would be something to take up with Social Security. I'm sure there's an appeal process. I don't know if your child gets Mass Health or Medicaid. Those things are something you also want to look at, you know. We're trying to put together, between all the other issues that we're trying to deal with in special ed, sort of a resource list of what parents can access and utilize, and sort of, you know, even myself, I know the majority of the services that I looked into when my daughter was younger, I only found out about from talking to other parents, because healthcare professionals are not very, they're not very knowledgeable about that stuff that we need to access. And even sort of the state agencies, while we do have good services available, they don't really do any outreach for us. So it's really up to us to find them. So we are trying to develop a list on that. But if you want to fill out one of the general issue forms and talk about what your issue is, then we can connect back with you directly on what your child's circumstances are and what we know about information in terms of potentially accessing more resources. Okay? So the methodology of instruction, I was talking about whether it be small group, whether it be, you know, a rules-based reading program. Does your child need to review the vocabulary in advance? Do they need to have text read aloud to them, and because they don't have the ability to read it now? One of the things that you should know about that's a free resource is that if your child has a specific learning disability, the federal government provides Bookshare, which gives your child access to, it's text-to-speech, so it's sort of a read-aloud program that your child can have access to, which is not to replace specialized services for reading remediation, but it actually gives your child access to that information in a better way while they're working on the reading skills, okay? So it's a free resource. I always like to point people to free resources whenever we can identify them. So that's something to ask about if your child has a disability in the area of reading. It's called NIMAC, it's Bookshare. So if your child's diagnosed with a specific learning disability in the area of reading, then the school can sign them up for it, and they'll get an account number, and then they can access it through a computer or through a tablet even. Yeah, and that's sort of the long federal government name, but those are the initials, NIMAC, but you just want to ask the school for Bookshare, okay? So once we go through the whole PLEP A and we go through the how your child's impacted in the general education curriculum, sorry, go ahead.
What's the name of that program again?
Bookshare.
NIMAC?
NIMAC is the federal agency, yeah. It's like the National Institute of, you know, blah, 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 but Bookshare is what you want to access, so that's the specific service in there. So once you go through the core curriculum areas, then you go on to PLEP B, which is other areas impacted by your child's disability, meaning physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech services, behavior. These are also areas where you want to check off the issues of extracurricular activities and non-academic activities. If your child has their school has an after-school program, or there's other activities that your child's not going to be able to participate in without specialized services or support, you want to make sure that all those areas are checked off. This is also an area to check off sort of assistive technology. Daily living skills is something you might want to include in there, whether it's sensory issues. You want to call out specifically what those are. And then you're going to move down that same page and you're going to develop the accommodations list for what is it they need during OT, PT, and speech. You know, do they need a specialized bike to do PT? Do they need, a weighted pencil grip? You know, any of those things. There's different tools to even eating if your child's severely impacted. All of those things you want to be listed as accommodations, meaning what is it that my child needs to have access to as part of their school day in order for them to be working on the skills in each of these areas. Yes, ma'am?
Since accommodations aren't typically told to you what's available, is there a place that you can go to find out what all the options are? Because just listening to the examples that you provided here is far more than anything I've ever heard.
Yeah, there's many different lists of accommodations. What we'll try to do is I'll try to pull one it's very broad, and we can put some on our website as more examples, okay? And I'll try to do that by type of disability so that they're more specific. But please know that the list is never finite, because every child, some children are going to require something that no one else needs. Like some children will require a communication device that they activate through an eye gaze. Do you know what I mean? It can get that level of specificity. But sure, we can put up more examples, and I think that's helpful to hear, because I think since I live special ed so much, there's a lot of things that I know that I don't know that other people don't have access to. So that's helpful for us so that we can add more information about that on the website and in a handout, okay? And if there's a specific type of disability that you're looking for possible accommodations list for, if you want to identify that before you leave, I'll look at that specifically as well, okay? So as we're talking about sort of the PLEP B, so that's all areas that aren't the core curriculum. The issue I didn't talk about was performance criteria and how are we measuring progress. Progress reports are something that you should get every time the report card comes out, and the progress reports are meant to tell you how your child's doing on their benchmarks and goals in their IEP. And the reason is that we don't want to be finding out at the end of the IEP period that the child's not making sufficient progress. We want to be identifying that in the progress report, so that if your child's not making the progress that the team identified, or you're seeing it that, at home, he's supposed to be able to do something, or they're working on something at school, and it doesn't seem to be progressing forward, you want to reconvene the team. You can call a team meeting at any time to address an issue that you know, whether it's you need a new evaluation, you don't need the whole team for that, you can talk to the team chairperson, but if there's been an issue, you know, your child's not making progress, or there's something that the team needs to discuss, you're not confined to one IEP meeting a year. You can convene the team at any time. Obviously, I'm not saying we want to have, you know, more than a few. You would say, okay, well, we want to capture a bunch of things in one, but don't wait a whole year. That's the reason we have progress reports, because we don't want to be waiting a whole year before we say, it's not working, what do we need to change? Either we need to, you know, change the goal and the benchmark, it was inappropriate, or do we need more services, or do we need to change the strategy that we were using for this child in order to try to make them use progress. So remember that you have the right to do that. Once you get through all the accommodations and any changes to methodologies, and again, methodology can be something as simple as your child needs to have a small group reading, you know, small group for reading, or small group for writing, or small group for math, or small group during OT, or one-to-one, you know, those things, because that's not how the other kids would get the services in the general education curriculum. So you want to call that out in the IEP, which is what do they need that's different, and what is that? With regard to the next section, that's where we get into the goals and benchmarks. So in Massachusetts, we still have short-term objectives and benchmarks, which means the IEP goal is going to state the progress for the year, and the short-term objectives and benchmarks are what are the steps that need to be achieved in order to ultimately to achieve that final goal. So they can be consecutive, where it's sort of, you know, Mary will take 5 steps, then Mary will take 10 steps, then Mary will walk 25 feet. It can be progression in terms of one particular goal, or it could be that your child will be able to write a 4-paragraph essay, you know, on grade level, and then you want to break it down and saying, first they're going to be able to identify the main topic, the idea, they're going to be able to write legibly, they're going to be able to go back and correct for punctuation and grammar. So all of those benchmarks, even though they're not exactly the same, they relate to the same type of goal. So really what you're going to take a look at is what is the overall goal, and then what are the steps that my child needs in order to be able to get there. And how you select the goal is based on what your evaluation said to begin with, in terms of where is your child behind his or her peers. What is the area that we need to be focusing on? And again, you also need to prioritize what the goals are. You're not going to have, you know, very lofty goals in the academic arena if the child's having a really difficult time currently with behavior. Are we out of time? Sorry, I'll try to move it along. So goals and benchmarks, again, it's all individualized based on who your child is and what areas you want them to focus on in their IEP. The next section is the service delivery, and I broke it out here in the handout so that you can actually understand what that grid is supposed to mean. At the top of the page, under grid A, and the grid is broken into 3 sections. It actually says A, then it says B, and then it says C. So A at the top is for all consultation and training services. So if your child's receiving services in a pull-out session from a reading specialist, you want there to be a consult between the reading specialist and your child's general education teacher, so that they're talking to each other and they're sharing strategies and what's effective for that child. So that's consults and training. It can also be training for parents. If your child has a communication device that you need to help with your child with at home, you can ask for training on that communication device. Or if your child's using software that they're also accessing at home, you can ask for training on that. So training and consultation is at the top. B is what services is your child receiving in the general education classroom, meaning along with their non-disabled peers. Who's coming in to provide services to your child in that setting. In grid C is pull-out services. What services does your child get that require them to be taken out of the general education classroom? And if your child's in a substantially separate setting, all of the services should be under grid C for direct services, not training and consult, but there should be no services in grid B if your child's in a substantially separate setting, because they're not in the general education classroom, okay? And you want to look at what's the type of service, who's providing that service. You know, if I'm getting occupational therapy, I want an occupational therapist providing that service. I don't want SPED staff because I don't really know who that is and I don't know if that person's qualified to be delivering those services. So you want to track it along, the type of service, the person that's giving it to them, how often they're getting it, and then the other side is just the dates that should track along with the IEP. Are they getting it 1 time a week, 2 times a week, for 30 minutes, for 45 minutes? You want to look at all of that, and you want to talk about whether or not you think it's a sufficient amount of time based on each one of those services that are listed. You can request more services. The team needs to agree on the amount of services, but you certainly may not be in agreement with the exact amount of services, and I'll talk about how you address that in your response to the IEP. The next sections are non-participation justification, meaning if your child's pulled out of class, the district has to say why that's necessary and appropriate. Then we go on to transportation. If your child has special needs, do they require specialized transportation? If they do, is it door to door or is it a specific location? And does your child require a monitor on the bus? Does your child have behavioral issues that they're going to be getting out of their seat, potentially causing a safety issue for themselves or for others? Does your child have issues with seizures that someone needs to be monitoring them? You know, you want to say the bus driver is driving the bus. The bus driver is not responsible. I mean, I'm saying sort of realistically, they can't do 2 things at once. Of course, they're going to intervene if something's going on, but if your child needs attention while that bus trip is going on, you want to look at those issues and get that service added to your IEP. MCAS, does your child need any accommodations while they're taking the MCAS test? Whatever your child gets under PLEP A for those accommodations for the you know, math and reading and writing and social studies and science, when they're taking the MCAS, they should have access to those same accommodations. They actually can't have access to an accommodation under MCAS unless they have it during the regular school year, because we want them being tested in the way that they're learning throughout the school year. So those lists need to align. It can be taking the test in a separate setting. You know, it can have portions of the test read to them, provided it's not the reading portion of the test. So it's really whatever the MCAS accommodations are, and whether or not your child takes the regular MCAS, or if they take the MCAS Alt, which is a portfolio, that's a different type of test that basically tracks the child's individual progress, but is different from the regular MCAS test. Additional information is really a catch-all section, meaning if it didn't fit anywhere else in the IEP, put it in there. Does your child get medication at school? You want to tell them what type of medication and the amounts. That's information you want to give directly to the nurse, but you also want to put it in the IEP so that everybody's aware of it. Does your child require a one-to-one aid? That might be something to go in additional information, although I would argue that it more appropriately goes in the service delivery grade. Once you finish your IEP meeting, you're supposed to get at the end of your meeting either a draft IEP or a team summary sheet saying what it is that the team agreed to. You want to get that before you leave your team meeting, because you don't want to get an IEP that's different from what your notes are at home, and then you don't have any record of what the team actually agreed to. So make sure you get the team summary sheet. It's always very helpful, and you know, it's a written document that the district is bound to. So you want to get that before you leave the meeting. Then you need to get your IEP within 2 weeks of the team meeting. If you don't get your IEP within 2 weeks, you need to call the SPED coordinator, because that's the time frame that they need to follow. And then once you get the IEP, you have 30 calendar days to respond to the IEP. So you need to either accept it, reject it. You can partially accept, partially reject. And then you can also, what I call is reject by omission. So it's either all good and you accept the whole thing, or, you know, there's areas that you're in disagreement with, so you can partially reject, meaning they put something on the IEP that you disagree with, or you can partially reject for omission, meaning you're rejecting because you asked for things and they're not on there. So if I said that I wanted my daughter to have PT for 3 times a week and the team said, no, we only think she needs it once a week, I would put on my response section, partially rejected, I reject the following portions. I reject by omission the additional 2 times 30 minutes a week I requested for physical therapy for my daughter. What you're doing is you're creating a record that you were not in complete agreement with the district about the IEP. And what you want to know is that, you know, sort of if you get it, you can take it to mediation, which is a free process if you're still in disagreement, but you can first check off that you want a meeting to discuss the rejected portions to see if you can reach an agreement, and then you have the option to go to mediation. You can also go to a hearing, but I wouldn't suggest that anybody do that without an attorney because that's a much more formal process with discovery and definitely lawyers on the side of the district. Separate and distinct from the IEP is the placement. That's the type of placement and the location of where it is that your child's going to go to school. So either you're going to have your child placed in full inclusion, full inclusion means they're in that general education classroom all day long. People can come in and give them services, but that means they're in that classroom for most all of that day. You can be in full inclusion and have some pull-out services, but full inclusion means that, you know, that's the type of program that your child's going into. Partial inclusion is when kids are in the general education classroom from either part or most of their day, and then they get taken out for portions of their day to get services, and then they go back into it. So I know it sounds like they're different, but they are different, but they can also be the same depending on the program that your child goes into. The bigger difference is substantially separate, meaning that your child's going into what we have now as highly specialized strands, which means they're not in the general education classroom at all. You know, and what you want to look at is if your child is currently in a highly specialized strand, the law is that your child is supposed to be educated in the least restrictive environment, and what that really means is with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. And if your child is in a substantially separate program, and maybe that's appropriate for your child currently based on who they are and what their current needs are, but you should also look at, are there times during the day where my child could be accessing his or her typical peers for social interactions, for unstructured times during recess and lunch, during art and music, where the demands academically are much less rigorous. So look at all of those things because we want our children to be integrated as much as possible. Inclusion is what we hear about all the time at SpedPac that people want us to increase. It's something that we've been advocating very strongly with the district. And the purpose of the law is that, you know, we want our children to be integrated with their non-disabled peers because that's the way the world is. And our children need to learn to be with their non-disabled peers, and their non-disabled peers need to learn to be with them because that's how society works, and that we're all living in this world together, and we want to know and understand each other and be able to help each other. And if children are kept separate, the opportunity for that to happen is decreased substantially. So that's my quickest basic rights IEP workshop because I know we're over time. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to stay and take them, but I know the children have arrived, so people might need to go. Thank you.
Real quickly, I just want to let you know that I just created a page for basic rights, which has another presentation slideshow from the Federation. We also have a video from last year's basic rights, so if you want to see a slightly different angle, different questions and answers.
Hopefully I was wearing a different outfit.
But that's available. This video will be available, so if you think you missed something, you can go back and
So
see
you can
it.
identify.
So we'll continue to do this. There'll be, as we get more information, I'll put it up on the website as well. Hopefully it'll help you out. There's IEPs explained, 504s explained. All that information's there, and there's this page dedicated for it. So thank you for coming.
Send me what you need. Yeah.